Hello everybody, my name is Ian Ellis. Welcome to Great Artist Steel. I'm just going to go through mixing browns using two colour mixing. I'm going to use Monet's palette with this one. The other ones, when I was mixing yellow, mixing red and purple and green, I used a really big palette. But now I'm trying to narrow it down, and it's got cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, vermilion. I'm not using it, so instead of alizarin crimson, I've got rose madder. It's a rich kind of rose madder. It's not a very expensive one. All my paints, remember, you shouldn't pay more than £5 for a tube. Cobalt violet, French ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, emerald green, and viridian green. And I've mixed a few of the hues using these colours. So I've mixed myself a yellow green with the cadmium yellow, mixed with the emerald green. And I've got yellow orange. I've mixed with the cadmium orange and cadmium yellow, and I've got a blue green, and I've mixed with the cobalt blue and the viridian green. So I've got 12 colours there I can use within that. I've got, okay. Now this is a nice thing about when you've got at least 8 hues, you can do this. You can mix your own hues. The only thing is though, when you're mixing your own hue, you never get in a really constant colour. So it's just worthwhile, if you can afford to, is to buy a bigger range of colours. And then what you're getting to know the behaviour of a colour, and it'll be in its constant state, because you'll always get the same colour when you buy it at the tube. Very difficult to get the same colour again when you're mixing. So just getting to know each colour. You know how it behaves when you mix complementary with it, or if you mix colours close to it. Okay. Anyway, just to structure a bit, I'm identifying a brown. I'm going to go for cadmium orange. Cadmium orange and darken will give me a brown. So if you're looking at brown, it's a weird name, because people ask me when I first started teaching, or when the beginners go, "Where's brown on the colour wheel?" But brown is not a colour. It's one of the few names we have for a shade of a colour. So you call them browns. We would say shades of orange, or red oranges and red oranges, and shades of orange reds we would call browns. Even orange though, when it starts moving over, you darken some of these yellow oranges, they'll be kind of greenish hue about them. And reds, if you darken this red, a rose madder or alizarin crimson, you won't get a brown. It would be more kind of like a purplish colour. But the brown when it gets a bit warmer colours, just down around. So I'm going for the cadmium orange, the kind of brown I can get when I mix that. Again, to see the kind of brown you get, I've got black here, and I can just see what happens when you mix the orange with a bit of black, and how it will go brown. That's one way. If you were not following the 2 colour mixing rules, is to add a bit of black with the oranges. Which is a lovely colour. Now, what I'm going to do is try and see if we can get these colours using 2 colour mixing. A nice dark brown. Looks the cadmium orange, when it's darkened, it looks like a burnt umber. Burnt sienna colour, isn't it? And you're getting a kind of burnt umber here when you darken it. Now let's see if we get what kind of colours we get when we start moving across. Now if I want to get that kind of burnt sienna colour, use darkening the cadmium orange. Remember, I'm not using the cadmium orange for the 2 colour mixing. I'm using it if you use black or complementary colour. I'd use it. We can complementary, perhaps one of the blues. I'll get that. So if I'm going to try and see if I can get it by using colours either side. That's why I've mixed this yellow green, because if I'm going to use something like a different red, if I use the green it won't go across the orange I want. They go almost complementary. So I've had to add a yellow green so I can choose some of these colours to get that red brown. So if I use I think I can hardly see the difference. So that's cadmium orange and that's a vermilion. I think on the camera that'd be hard to see, but it's slightly. If you just look at the red, when you see coming through the glass like that, and then you see the orange, maybe you can see the difference there. Yeah. Apparently the human eye is not very good at actually seeing orange. Maybe perhaps explains why we get it wrong. It's an excuse anyway, isn't it? But let me just move these out of the way. Right, remember, no cadmium orange, so I can use the colour either side of it, which is a vermilion, a tiny bit of the of the yellow green I've got here. A bit more. Still looks a little bit more of an orange there. Now, just back to the red again. Almost there. Just a little bit more green. Just gone a bit too far. Yeah, it's kind of okay. It's okay. It's quite close to the colour. Problem is when you're mixing the browns, when you're using kind of yellow, what happens? The yellow and the yellow in that kind of muddies the colour a little bit. So perhaps not the best way. The black looks better, but like for getting that colour. So if I actually used a slightly bit more green, with that, perhaps make that. I suppose I couldn't get either side of that. So let's try the other way. So try go for the orange, yellow orange there, the other side of it. Put yellow in that as well. This is a problem. But that's why artists have used burnt sienna and yellow ochre, because this kind of thing can happen. That's why I personally like burnt sienna, because it stops this sort of thing happening. You can use burnt sienna not to get that colour, but you could use yellow ochre and a violet to get it. But I'm using the pure colour, so I'm using the cobalt violet now with the orange. Just a tiny bit of the cobalt violet. And seeing the orange move over, it's still in the yellow-orange area. I'll use a bit more colour. I mean, the lovely advantage of this is the shifts in colour. You can see if you want a yellow-orange, you know how to get one. And I've got this colour now, which is still in the yellow-orange area. So there's a big gap, isn't there, between, say, the yellow-orange and that orange. So I'm getting this lovely brown here, which is going towards slightly more yellowy than the cadmium orange. So okay, it's just a case of adding a little bit more violet, cobalt violet. Perhaps going a little bit too dark for the brown I want over here, but it's pretty good. It's a nice colour, but it's going slightly darker, so I've got a darker version of this colour in between those two. So I'm getting a colour. So again, I'm getting some lovely different browns in there. Now, if we go for, say, a darker colour, want to get a darker brown, I could maybe use the ultramarine blue with the cadmium itself. Will get her complementary. You should be able to get a black with those two. Yeah, so it's on the way towards black, so I can use the... Okay, two colour mixing, you're getting complementary colours there, and you're getting all this lovely black I've got down here. I can add a bit more blue, ultramarine blue to it. And you can see I'm getting that dark brown. I've got already mixed with the black, which is richer. It's a lovely colour. That's a really dark burnt umber, really dark colour there. So again, I've got the dark colour, the richness of that. Not so. What it could do, I mean, to solve the problem when you've got a colour that's not quite rich enough, it's just a case of adding a little bit of the orange. So you're mixing the two colours to get that. So you can just add a little bit of the orange to that, and you see you've got that colour. So the third colour is the colour you're trying to mix. So that's giving you a lovely range within that. Again, the colour I've got here, I could maybe darken with the complementary, or I use the colour I've mixed earlier with to get the dark colour. I used the violet and the yellow. Got myself a dark colour for one of that. Want to get a kind of a richer colour closer to this colour, I can just add those two, and I'm getting a nice range of browns. Now, like I said, these are kind of, what about ready browns that go across there? I could maybe go for a colour further away. Again, the red brown, I can use the orange. And I'm getting a kind of it's just hovering between a brown and a purple there. See that? Add a bit of white to it, it will look a bit very pink. So just a little bit more of the yellow orange, and then that. So we're getting these kind of red browns, very dark red browns. Again, if you want to brighten them up, I mean, I could go for the a stronger yellow brown. If I maybe mix those two together, I could maybe get a richer colour between the two. But that's lovely. I've got a really beautiful brown, red brown there, and two dark red brown, complementary colours. Complementary colour of the warm red. Again, what I'm going to do in the next video, I'm going to look for mixing greys, and this will kind of inform you more about different complementary colours if you don't already know. But for the moment, I'm just going to go for the complementary without really explaining how the complementary, but just the knowledge of those two colours, the cadmium red and the green blue, will give a nice red brown as well. They're complementary colours. That gives a really lovely colour. And again, if I use the viridian green, it's to see, remember with the vermilion, and Edward Hopper in the video was using the vermilion with the green. So I got the emerald green. You get a really nice brown using those two as well. So again, lovely colour going across all those yellow browns. You're getting different browns with different levels of colour, because I'm going through across the different hues within that, though, in this way. We're going they're really gorgeous colours. I could use cadmium orange with viridian green, bit of that. Again, now you can see what's happening there. I'm getting a green, it's going almost a dark yellow, so that's losing the brown quality of the colour. Now that means that it's gone through, I've gone across the dark yellows, dark greens, although that's so just a case of adding more of the cadmium orange. I get more of the cadmium orange than that, and bring it back towards brown. Lovely colour though. I mean, it's a khaki kind of colour. I've put a bit of white with it. You see what kind of colour it looks. That's hovering between brown and green. Beautiful colour. I can then just slightly move it over towards what we normally recognise as a brown. Slightly, it's just moved over from the kind of khakiness towards a brown. Beautiful colour. That's just using two colours, and you can get the shift. If I'm moving over, you can see the colour starting to get brighter as it moves over towards the cadmium orange, and I'm getting all these lovely oranges like that. Anyway, a lovely range of browns I've got there. Just using two colour mixing. I used a couple of complementaries, but mainly just staying either side of the cadmium orange, or I could actually stay either side of the yellow orange to get the darker colours there. I could use the using the yellow green here, and mixing that with a vermilion. Let's see what we get. Again, that's going across these colours. That's lovely. And you're getting this really lovely shade of warm yellow, and I keep adding the cadmium orange to that, and it starts bringing it back towards brown. That's just hovering between the brown. Again, gives you a lovely rich colour, and then keep adding the orange, and you're getting these lovely subtle orange brown, yellow orange browns. I call them yellow orange. It's really good to try and, if you can identify all these colours, looking at the colour from a point of view, what kind of hue is it? Remember, every one of these colours I've looked at belongs to one of these hues or in between them. And if you're still not sure about that, you go back to my colour theory and just have a look at that, because that will help you. I would call that a yellow, orange, brown, and it's really important because if you can identify your colours with words and articulate them, you know what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to aim for, and you know what you're getting, so you can get it again. And so the colour theory I've presented is so important for everyone to go learn. I'm really pleased to see that people are starting to see there's something to learn with the 2 colour mixing. It is a very unique way of learning from a point of learning. I do think artists have looked at this in the past and seen would be intuitively learned. It's all just learned through trial and error. But how much they knew the logic of it, I don't know. But the logic is explained in the line. It certainly looked like they knew the logic of it. I mean, I'm sure they did. I mean, Monet painting, it's moving. That's orange again, moving from going towards the cadmium red, which is quite a red orange in this one I've got. Some cadmium oranges you find different makes will be more orange, more yellow within that. But anyway, hope you enjoyed that, everybody. And tune in again. Thanks again. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye.